I think it's important to first discuss some of the defining themes that really helped guide us through tackling this project. And the first one is loss. And so there's really two senses to this theme. Obviously there's the individual loss, so that's Jimmy losing his friends and having to cope with that. But there's also this sense of societal loss. And this is more in terms of proper morals and social equality. A good way to think about this, if we consider today, people care and respect each other a lot more than they do in Atwood's future. I think that's a pretty clear point. And so that's something to keep in mind. Next we have loneliness. Obviously Jimmy is our lone survivor that's struggling on his own, and so that isolation is going to naturally lead to this theme. And then the final one here is hope. Now Atwood kind of leaves it up for debate at the end of the novel whether or not we should be hopeful about the future, and so this element is definitely still present in the film. So with these themes in mind, let's get some background information about the film. Kristen? Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, I can do this too. So the movie, obviously, it's a 2018 drama, so it's a bit more serious than the previous groups. It's a drama of the novel, and it's directed by Christopher Nolan. So this is the acclaimed director of Interstellar, the Dark Knight series, that sort of vibe. Now it stars Tom Hanks, Colin Hanks, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Felicity Jones. And so I thought that was funny, actually, because Benedict Cumberbatch plays Crake in our film as well. And then Tom Hanks and Colin Hanks play Jimmy, respectively, and Felicity Jones is Oryx. Now, it did quite well, because we're awesome at making movies, with a great box office opening, and it won several Academy Awards as well. Why not, right? And so, to give you an idea of what it looks like, here are the actual film covers for the release.
Okay, so we have three covers.
Just click.
Yeah, we have three cover images, one for the front, one for the back, and an inside cover. And all three of them capture a major theme that's prevalent throughout the novel. This first one is the front cover. It has Jimmy walking along the beach with some hints of apocalypse, and it shows like the theme of loneliness that's prevalent throughout the novel. And then here is the back cover. It's an inside view from inside one of the compounds immediately following the release of Crake's virus. And the calmness inside of the compound conflicts with the destruction and chaos outside of the compound. And that provides a sense of physical loss and the loss of humanity. And the last one is the inside cover, and it pays homage to the theme of hope that the Quakers have, for their vision of the future. And all three images have a minimalist style that represent unique aspects of each theme.
Please.
So for our critical essay, we decided to analyze Nolan's interpretation of the film and which aspects from the book he chose to include and which he chose not to include, and what that said about their significance in the story. So essentially, our thesis argued for the relevance of the film in saying that it can serve both as a warning against the dangers of unchecked scientific progress, but also as hope for the future. So we chose to go about this by looking for common threads between Nolan's interpretation and present society, and we looked at his strengths and weaknesses when translating the story itself into a movie. And so our first paragraph basically focused on the concept of scientific progress and how it's portrayed both positively and negatively. And so this first sentence right here kind of captures the main idea of our first paragraph. And we talked mostly about the genetic engineering that goes on with the animals like the piguns and the rakunks, as well as the pharmaceutical corporations like Healthline and UU, and how they're portrayed very negatively. And so we talked about the fact that although their existence and their corrupt behavior ultimately leads to the downfall of society. How do you get Although ultimately it leads to the downfall of society, there is hope found in the fact that these technologies could have been used for positive social change. So instead of creating new diseases for profit, they could have eradicated existing diseases. And instead of taking advantage of the people living in the pleblands, they could have shortened the social economic gap. And we talked about how this would be really relevant to an audience in 2018 as we enter this era of what seems to be the height of scientific research.
So in this part of the critical essay, we talked about how Atwood's theme fit into the movie of scientific development getting away from scientists. Specifically when it came to like the baboons and other parts of the novel that where the baboons specifically were depicted as large pigs that were large enough to hold human organs, where nowadays you can see that like we use pig valve stems and human stems, and in the future it would be a pretty easy crossover that we could somehow genetically modify them for other organs that we could use from them. And then also in these scenes we can see Jimmy reflecting on the species' mistakes, on humanity's mistakes that the film illustrates. It illustrates the dangerous consequences of unchecked scientific development. Here we see the film's contrast of greed and loss of human life in the future scenes to the flashbacks to the current scenes that have Snowman's loneliness and shows his faith in overcoming the challenges of taking care of the Quakers as one of the only humans left on Earth. By interspersing flashbacks with a large population, lots of updated technology, with the future with Snowman showing him all alone and just living among the remnants of technology. There's a big contrast that's drawn that when you're reading the book, it can be hard to see that contrast exactly as you go through chapters in one or the other, but when it's in a film that it's condensed down and it goes back and forth pretty fast and it's visual, you can see it pretty clearly. We thought that Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays Crake, would fit the role really well, especially in the flashbacks, as he has a long history of playing highly intelligent characters that kind of have a darker demeanor, and that he could really portray that like underhanded, really smart, coming up with developing all these technologies and stuff, and then coming to the conclusion that humanity probably shouldn't survive, and that the Quakers should be what continues on. And then here we see that even though Jimmy promised Oryx here to protect the Quakers, the film shows Jimmy's increasing reluctance as he embraces his, as he becomes more and more lonely, and sees that maybe the Quakers aren't going to survive without him. But it turns around at the end of the film. We try to have a more hopeful spin on the end of it. So in order to make of course there's a big difference between the film and the novel in that just time-wise you have to cut some things out, and we wanted to have a PG-13 rating so that we could get to a larger audience. So we had to cut out some of the pornographic stuff in the flashbacks, all the sexual content, and some of the harsher violence, and focus more on the story and the contrast of technologies and stuff that would appeal to a larger audience. We combined some of the flashbacks and took out some of the other ones, and instead of addressing technology individually, some of them were lumped together, or you could just see them in the background of scenes and you go, oh, that looks pretty cool, where in a book you have to write about it specifically, but when you're showing it on film, you can just have it something in the background, or a large city, that kind of thing, and you don't have to address it directly. And then a big part of it was the realism, and that this book was published in the early 2000s, and in this film coming out in 2016, that it would be something where the technology, of course, would be updated. I mean, just in the past 10 years, we've had so much going on now that from what Margaret Atwood wrote, there's something that you couldn't imagine, even like mobile phones, that kind of thing. But in order to make it so that the film is set in the near future, so we have things going back to the baboons that today we could take pig parts and put them in ourselves, that it wouldn't be a huge leap to use other parts from animals in ours to grow organs and stuff.
All right, so a lot of text there, right? So this last part here, these are some concept images that are from the production process of the film. And so we think it'll give you a good idea, after hearing all that text, what this film actually looks like, how to take Atwood's world and put it into a real life film. So the first one here is the Pagoons that Raymond were just talking about. And if this looks just kind of like a grainy pig that's a little bit larger than a normal pig, then right on, right? Because this needs to look like something that people can identify with. And so if you have some crazy Pagoon animal, nobody's going to know what that is. And so then the film doesn't seem real. We didn't want this to be a science fiction film that's in the realm of unrealistic. It needs to be possible. And so the Pagoons do that, as do the Rakunks. You see here, it's a raccoon and a skunk, but it's still identifiable by those two elements. It's not some crazy animal that nobody would ever know what it is. And I would not recommend doing this with a real raccoon, like trying to feed it something, but Rakunks will work. And so now let's look at the Paradise Lab. So this is the Paradise Dome, I should say. This is the building where Crake does his work in. And you'll notice it's got that kind of modern concrete glass look to it. It's surrounded by trees. But at the same time, it was important not to give away what this building is for before you go inside. And that's a big part of the novel, too. Jimmy has no idea what goes on in there until he's actually inside. And so we think this keeps it pretty ambiguous, but it still looks like an important building. And then as you go in, of course, here's the Craker Lab. So this is where the real stuff is actually happening. And the big thing to note here, there's no sterile and nerdy white kind of lab coat type feel to this lab. It's very dark and cool. And we thought that matched Crake's character quite well. If he had his dream lab, it wouldn't be like the typical white lab that you would think of. And so there's that, and then of course the highlight of the lab is the observation area into the Craker's environment. You can kind of see there's a congregation of them in there. Now you can't talk about the Craker lab, of course, without having Crakers. So here's a sketch of one. Now this is where there's a little bit of a creative departure from the book. In the novel, Atwood portrays Crakers as looking like humans. They have the same sort of skin complexion. We thought that would be kind of hard for an audience to discern between the Crakers and regular humans at first glance. And so by making them green, obviously they immediately stand out as not exactly human. And this is also just kind of a hint at that idea that they're supposed to live within the confines of nature, which humans did not do. So that kind of matches that. And of course they're wearing clothes because they couldn't be naked. So this is Oryx. She obviously works with the Crakers. And this was a difficult position to cast because Oryx needs to have that cunning and resourceful feel to her at times, but at the same time she's also very apathetic with Jimmy and Crake. And so Felicity Jones kind of meets this middle ground quite well between those opposing characteristics. And she also has green eyes, so that's a huge plus because Oryx needs to have green eyes. So now we're going to talk about some more Crake elements here. So this is Watson and Crick. It should look familiar. And this was really a no-brainer, right? The modern University of the future, we think, is going to be kind of like the modern technical colleges of today. And so this building just so happens to have that glass modern look that you're looking for. And a couple other things to point out. The weather's very bright and happy here, so it kind of puts you in a better mood. And you'll notice there's lots of people walking around, and that's kind of hinting at the fact that there's a lot of important work going on here. This is in contrast to Jimmy's school, which we'll see in a minute. So just keep that in mind. This is Crake himself, obviously Benedict Cumberbatch. Again, a difficult position to cast. You guys kind of touched on it. He has that dark and hyper-intelligent and mysterious feel to him. But at the same time, he couldn't be the attractive side of that. If you think of like James Bond or Bruce Wayne, they're very intelligent and dark. And Benedict Cumberbatch kind of is more on the nerdy side. So that's why he fit this role quite well. That's much more Crake. So here's Jimmy's school. This is Martha Graham. And so when considering Watson and Crick, which we just looked at, you'll notice it's a lot more run down. It looks older. The weather's kind of lame. It puts you in a bad mood. And as I said before, there's no people here. So again, this is hinting at the fact that there's not much of importance going on. I know I'm saying that to an English teacher. There's nothing important going on, but in the story. And so this is Jimmy. Colin Hanks plays him. And this is the young flashback Jimmy. Should make that distinction. And so he has that kind of awkward, quirky feel to him. And it just so happens that he has a youthful look that's good for the teenage and young adult college years. So he fits this quite well. And he has the great benefit of being related to Tom Hanks, who plays the snowman version of Jimmy. And this was a no-brainer. You think about how well he was able to portray that kind of on his own, struggling to survive character in Castaway. The same sort of thing is going to happen here. So, and he's got brand recognition, so that helps for movies too. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what exactly this film looks like. If there's any questions, of course, we'd be happy to answer them.